Good evening and welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science. Tonight, I am really excited. We're going to talk aesthetics versus performance. So we have a couple of great architects on tonight to join us. Very excited about that. I'm Emily Mottram, architect here in Maine. I know it's not the fall, but I really wanted a hard cider. So I went out and I got some hard cider and I put it in my great koozie that says women who behave rarely make history, since, Kylie and I recorded our podcast last week on women in construction. So I love that koozie. But BS and Beer is an independent grassroots movement. So I want to say thank you to all of you for coming on and volunteering your time, and us hosts who volunteer our time every week to make this happen. We also want to say thank you to our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building, for helping us get it up, get it on YouTube, and host it every week. So thank you to them. And huge thank you to our audience members who tune in every week to listen to us throw down some BS. Maybe some of it building science. So I'm going to turn it over to Kylie for announcements.
Yeah, I'm going to make it super brief tonight. I'm Kylie Jacques. I'm the senior editor at Green Building Advisor. I'm drinking my daily Gerol Steiner. When you engage in the chat box, just make sure that you click on all attendees and panelists so that everyone can see your comments. Fine Home Building sends out Zoom reminders about the show every week, and if you'd like those as well as some additional information, you can join the mailing list at the bsandbeershow.com. The video recording of tonight's show will be available at Green Building Advisor, and past shows can be found on YouTube. An audio-only version is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are currently reading, and God, I hope I make it to the end, Jacob Rakusen's Essential Building Science for our book club episode, which will be on April 1st. We've got a number of people who are going to join us from the audience, as well as the author. It should be fun. I'm learning tons and lots to say there. So the publisher is offering a 25% discount, and you need to enter the code ESSENTIAL with a capital E 25. That's the code. There are a number of events coming up, and we have some recommendations that we'd like to share, but I think the best way to do that is to just add those links to the chat box, with particular highlight on the student well assembly competition that Travis is helming right now. We're going to actually have a show, I think, the week after next, all about that. So it's really fascinating. I put a post on GBA today about it, talking about some of those details. I think it's a really fantastic venture. So I would like to highlight that. Other than that, I think it's time to kick it off to Travis to introduce our guests.
Yeah, hello, I'm Travis Brungart. I'm in Kansas City, essentially. I'm drinking a Boulevard Berry Noir just to make Emily mad because she doesn't like sours. Now that I've made the cracking open sound, I can start my show. I wanted to introduce our guests, but very briefly, I will say Kylie's right. We're doing a wall assembly competition for students. There is a lot of money in the game. There are prizes, and also there's education for all. So if you're interested in that, go to kcbsandbeer.org, and you can find out more about that or the links that are in there. And I am going to introduce our guests, but first I have to introduce a new host. A lot of you might have noticed that tonight we have not Michael Maines, but one Ben Bogey. And that's not for any other reason other than Mike is super busy and just can't say no enough. So we asked someone who is definitely on levels with Mike Maines in a lot of different things, and then also on other levels that Mike's not on, like the beard game. Come on, Ben. So we're excited to have Ben joining us to keep Mike's chair warm, and also to add his own flair, as he's done many times as a panelist, now as a host. Thanks for being on the team, Ben. We're glad to have you.
Absolutely.
Pleasure to be here.
Aboard.
One of the things
Ben Bogey apart.
One of the things that Mike did a great job of, and I'm excited about Ben helping with, is managing the chat, because I'm terrible at watching the show and managing the chat. But I think that Ben is, like I said, he's another Mike Maines level guy. He can watch the show and manage the chat. So you will definitely get good engagement there. And with that, I'm going to get started on the show. I'm fortunate to introduce James Hartford this evening. He's a creative technical partner at River Architects, where he contributes his building envelope expertise and leads the sustainable design process for each of the firm's projects. James is the founder and the past president of Passive House Alliance US, Hudson Valley chapter. He's brought certified passive house builder instruction to Newburgh. I'm probably not saying that right. Is it Newburgh?
You got it.
Yes. And certified passive house consultant training to Schenectady, New York. That's the one that's easy, is Schenectady, obviously.
That's easy.
And that's the first such programs in New York. Welcome to the show, James. Thanks for joining us. What are you drinking this evening? I saw you coming in heavy. What do you got?
Well, okay, so Imperial Stout, just because we're the day after St. Patrick's Day, right? Because you guys drink.
Yeah.
Something that's not in my bio is I play the bagpipes, and ordinarily I'd be very busy this time of year.
That's awesome. I love a good
love
piper.
that. I love a good piper.
Who doesn't love a good piper?
I love a good factoid. That's awesome.
I'm also going to introduce Mary Tepper, who is an architect based in Madison, Wisconsin, where she operates her practice and is the director of design at the design build company Associated House Rights. She is also a certified passive house designer and is a wonderful guest thus far. It's nice to meet you. Mary, thanks for joining us. What are you drinking?
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, I've got a local Wisconsin restoration cider company, Door County Cherry. So representing Wisconsin on 2 levels here.
Well done. Do you have interesting factoids? Are there unusual instruments? Are you a theremin practitioner?
Sorry.
Sorry, it was a deep dive in odd musical instruments.
No.
Fair enough. We also have our good friend Bob Swinburne back on. He's an architect based in Southern Vermont. His firm, Blue Time Collaborative, specializes in high-performance rural homes, and his team emphasizes excellent plans, emotionally uplifting spaces, low energy use, and locally sourced materials. Nice to see you again, Bob. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Travis.
What's going on, man? What are you drinking?
Well, I'm actually just drinking water, but maybe tomorrow night, if it's a Vermont beer.
Fantastic. A tribute?
But I'm staying away from alcohol for a variety of reasons for a few days anyway. Tomorrow's pizza night, so we'll make an exception. So
I'm glad to hear that. I have pizza night on Fridays too, and I just realized after introducing our wonderful panel, I really kind of ran right over you, Ben. I didn't give you any chance to say anything about yourself. So if you want to say hello in a better way than I gave you a chance to, please do that, and then we'll kick off the presentation.
It's a warm welcome. I'd expect nothing less from the Brew Crew. I'm Ben Boga. Not to sound weird, I'm guessing most of you know me. I'm currently a project manager in Connecticut, working in Connecticut in the Hudson Valley. I've had the great pleasure of working with James Hartford in a project in the past, doing a passive house retrofit. And I think it looks like James and I have got a really cool project coming up for this summer together. So I'm excited about that. Tonight I'm drinking local brew, Kent Brewing, a vague reassurance that everything's going to be all right. So
Nice.
on with the show.
That's just the thing we needed, is that vague reassurance.
It gets me through the day.
Are you kicking off our presentations tonight, Bob? Is that how this is going to go, or was there a different order established? I'm only paying attention.
We have no order or no. Yeah, this is chaos. A vague, reassuring chaos, of course. But I just have a little thing here. So should I do a share screen?
Yeah.
I like a
Let's
shared
see.
screen.
Let's do that.
All I need to do is make you a
You just have to
co-host.
enable me to.
Yeah.
This is the part of the show where I usually fill for technical difficulties and say something witty.
No, you should have it by now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to back up one. So first of all, I want to take issue with the whole versus. I think it's a little bit of a catch in the title, because I don't think it necessarily has to be aesthetics versus performance. So I found one good example that's probably pretty familiar to everybody about where it might be. So this is a house I did a few years ago. It's very traditional. It looks like a million other houses in New England. This is almost passive level house in performance. But I totally angsted about this whole eave detail. And I was interested to see what other people had to say about this. So it's done all over New England. It's when builders do it nowadays, they more often than not get it wrong because there's a really strong sense of a strong set of rules to this, proportion, scale, the whole bit. And my question is, why we love this detail? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make a lot of sense on a performance level. And so how can you, if you really, really want to do this, this is a house in an existing neighborhood, and it was really, to do this detail made a lot of sense. So in this case, I treated this whole detail as part of the siding. It's outside the rain screen entirely. So I'm just curious what other people think about this.
Can I ask you where's the fail on the performance side?
So you essentially have a flat soffit sitting there. You can put those little prickly things for pigeons or whatever, but it just seems like, a lot of, traditionally this is almost dead flat. It's got a slight slope. It's made of one piece of wood that somebody has planed to a taper. And it's an invitation for water to backflow into a building. It's an expensive detail, and it's a lot. And this, when we look at old buildings, we look at what works, what didn't work, and why. And I just keep coming up against this detail. It's like extra money spent, but it has such an emotional draw for people.
I agree. I don't like the fly rafter just hanging out into the eave transition. I like this return, even though it is always the first thing to rot. It's always the place where the bird builds the nest, and you have to get the ladder out to clean it. It has no function. It is purely form, although it does keep woodwright guys in business.
Yep. But I will, to go against the grain a little bit, say that, well, first off, I've been on houses that are 150 and 200 years old with this detail still intact.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things going on there. I've also built these details. They can be a little tricky to flash. You kind of have to prep and wrap your fully adhered up and onto the pitch soffit of the rake there a little bit, and then a lot of times I'll make a sheet metal or cap kind of piece to go on there just to kind of keep it from being wood. But I think they can be made durable. It is an expensive little area. You can suck up some time in those returns. They look good, though. I didn't know
that they had pipe on that long ago.
Yeah, they made it out of peat moss, I think.
Very often you used to see the tops of these actually clad in lead with a bunch of little nails going along. And nowadays you often see builders do it with a much steeper pitch and actually put roofing material there. But yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of these really traditional details that stick around, even though it's essentially extra money spent. And I think we solved our way around this by putting it entirely outside the WRB. There's no, it's a super simple shell, and it's all essentially part of the siding. But it's going to be interesting to watch it over the years and see what happens to it. But so, I mean, that's an example of much more traditional design. Where I want to take issue with the whole versus aspect of it is in my more recent work, we're doing a lot more. Most of my work is very rural, so you can get away with anything. But essentially, building science informs the aesthetics and vice versa. And I don't really see that it's a versus. It's and. So I'll show a project that some of you are familiar with from a previous BS episode. And this is a total and project. This is every little decision about building science informs the aesthetic and vice versa. And that's the ideal. You might be pushed a little bit more to one direction or the other if you're dealing with a more traditional stuff in a more traditional neighborhood. But a project like this, you really get to explore that confluence of design, aesthetics, and performance. So Yeah, I mean, I can show more pictures of this, but I was really interested. I keep running into this detail so often. And what do I do about it? Because I just love it, but it's, yeah, anyway. I will stop. There we go.
I'm sorry about the pregnant pause. I didn't know if my screen was frozen. That's on me. I'm supposed to keep this going. What I was going to say, before I thought I was frozen, I was going to say, I like the overhang in the foreground of the last picture you showed. I always feel like the overhangs are so important to protect our claddings, to help manage the water, to help manage thermal comfort as well on a lot of faces. And so I'm always like, oh, that's a win in the foreground, but then up high you don't have them, and I feel like that's a greater exposure, and that's an aesthetic choice. That's not a performance choice, right?
In this case, I mean, when you minimize the overhang, there has to be a good reason to do it. In this case, you know, it's a wooded setting. There's not a lot of high weather exposure. Rain is going to come down straight down much more often. Number one, make your exterior building materials bulletproof, including the window installation. And when you're dealing with thick walls, you can pull the window in a fair bit, and essentially each window gets its own little rooflet. So, I mean, building science and aesthetics right there. You really want to try to get all of that together. And yeah, in the case of that building there, had it been a much more, I think Mike Maines runs into this often. If you get into a really windy, rainy, like a coastal site or a mountaintop site, you get the wind coming in and the rain horizontally, and no amount of overhang is going to protect you. So in this case, it's, you know, it's much more wooded. There's not going to be a lot of rain, so rain is straight down. Also, I hear a lot of complaints about, I don't want a soffit that I'm going to have to paint. It's going to have birds' nests and bugs and all that sort of stuff up there. So, you know, you get sort of maintenance issues like that.
Totally fair.
But, you know, if you've got a bulletproof exterior, you know, something that's not going to take a lot of maintenance, it can take a hell of a beating, then you can get away with a little bit more.
Well said. I think both Mary and James had other things to share as well. Ladies first, or was there an order?
I don't think we conspired to an order. I have a lot of pictures to share, if that's okay. I don't know.
Bring it.
I can show more, but go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure exactly where this is all going to go. Let's see. How do I share? Share screen. Okay. Here we go. So, you know, in preparing for tonight, I went back and I looked at all the new houses that I designed over the past 7 years of living and working in Madison, Wisconsin. And it was a curious exercise to go through them and try to figure out exactly where I could sneak in performance. You know, I work in an area of the country where budgets are a little bit tighter and folks are a little bit more pragmatic. And although sometimes people come to me interested in performance goals, it is rarely their motivating factor for wanting to do a project. And so I educate people on ways to build better, but I often find myself trying to sneak things in. And the majority of my clients actually come to me with sites where there is one dominant view. And so that is always the challenge I seem to be facing, especially because that view is always Western. And we know that's one of the hardest ones to control for heat gain. So here was a lake house that I designed, and that's the street side. So no one really cares about that too much. But on the lakefront, you can see this is facing west. And one of the strategies that I was able to talk to the homeowners about was the idea of really deep Western porticos to provide a lot of solar protection for the house. Now, of course, I couldn't do it across the entire Western facade because one of their must-haves was this sort of beautiful modern double height curtain wall aesthetic. And so, but what also is not seen here is that, you know, this is exterior insulation, there's rain screen behind, this is boral shiplap siding, this is stucco here. You can see the reason why the idea to really open up to the western view is so important. Views, and you can actually see the Capitol building off there in the distance. But inside the house, I started to look for some strategies that I'd snuck in as well. And so here's a classic example with a lot of these modern open concept floor plans. I always try to thicken usually the 1 or 2 partition walls. And that is a conscious effort to give the HVAC guys a place to run their ductwork at the size they want and without lots of twists and turns and bends. And it also means that I never have to fight with them about wanting to put ducts in exterior walls. So here's an example of a slightly thickened partition wall, purely for mechanical chase. I also do that with built-ins. So this looks like a deep 24-inch cabinet right here, but in fact, the back half of that cabinet is purely mechanical chase. Here's a picture of the living room. And again, some of these walls that create that window bench. Again, with open concept, I'm trying to give folks ways to get up to the second story without having to go in the outside walls. I'll jump back here too. You know, in this window where we didn't have the Western pergola, we actually integrated a pretty robust solar screen shade up into the ceiling too. And so this was a challenging detail with a lot of furring down, because how do you get the window to go all the way up to the ceiling, but get shade pockets? So this whole area of the ceiling was planned actually to be furred down below the structure just to accommodate some of those elements as well as duct runs. There's the view from the living room off to the lake. And you can see how that Western shade structure doesn't really even obstruct the primary view, which was nice. And then of course, when you're outside in these 2 spaces, sort of the casual seating group and the dining area, it feels pretty darn nice. The last sort of aesthetic versus performance trick I had to do with this house was this idea of the floating master bedroom suite, the bird's house, as folks will refer to it. But you can see here how there's actually a tremendous amount of thickness below that window, whereas in the bedroom, the window is really close to the floor. And so that was something that I consciously worked out so that, you know, the duct runs that are running through that floor assembly to get to the grills in front of this window are in no way compromised by the cold air that's going to be below this space. We came up with a very robust series of details to get that section covered. Now I need to switch to the next project, and I'm right. So then I'll go back to one of the earliest projects I did after moving to Madison. And this was a fantastic project because the homeowners really, although they had very strong aesthetic visions for the house in terms of siding and views, again, to the west.
Mary, I'm still seeing the last project.
Okay, hold on, new share.
I don't know if anyone else is.
Yeah.
Hold on, thank you. We'll share this new project. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so this one, again, a lot of west-facing views. This tree was a really important element in the landscape, and so the views to that tree became very important. But again, here, you know, this basement area is going to be really well protected. We did incorporate shading here, and then again, this western window protected. But I found with this project, the homeowners were really interested in allowing us to explore some passive approaches. So, you know, I always start by really 3-dimensionally modeling my buildings. And I find that to me is as much about trying and playing around with some passive techniques related to shading, aesthetics and performance, but it also really helps me understand, you know, where I'm headed with how I want it all to look. So I spend a lot of time on modeling and rendering. This house, we actually got away with 3 inches of Roxel insulation with a rain screen with James Hardy fiber cement siding, as well as the Henry Blueskin VP adhered weather barrier. So this house scored, you know, below a 1 on the blower door test. And if it had incorporated any solar component, could have achieved net zero. Inside the house, we used the full Intello system. So we actually had 2 air barriers. Here's an example of where I actually, you know, my technique here where I build almost 2 walls on the outside if I know I want a duct run in that location. So this duct is fully inside the conditioned envelope of the house. Of course, that's the finished space with the big views up to the tree. And let's see. With this house, again, overhangs became really important. So this is a big south-facing window. This picture was taken in October. You can see the pumpkins. But in the summer, this entire window, that overhang was calibrated to fully shade so that we're not getting a lot of excessive heat from that clerestory window. This, again, is that October picture. So you start to see in the middle of the winter, the sunlight pours almost entirely down the length of this open concept room, which is fantastic. Concrete floors to help absorb some of that heat. In the bedroom, we again came up with a creative detail for some shading. So the curtain track behind some reclaimed beams. Here's another one I discovered that I would share. It's just a little trick. When we use high performance tilt turn windows, it's hard to convince people sometimes to use them because no one wants to have a window that is going to turn and stick out into the middle of the room. So with this project in particular, I designed every window assembly so that the two windows that turn in have a flat space to park against. And it's, you know, it's very classic with French door design, but I find it works really well with tilt turn windows. And here's an example in the child's bedroom. Again, the lower window and the upper window both fold back and park in place. And here's some more pictures of the deep overhangs on the south. This is actually a screen porch with motorized insect screen. There's the view inside that screen porch. You can see the track for that element. And then here is that basement western window I was showing you. Here it is in the summertime, and you can see how well that pergola detail is really working to shade that basement room from the direct sunlight. And then the last project I have to share is one that is still, let me see, did I get that up there? So this one is still kind of under construction. We're just doing a little bit of the finish work. Let me see.
We're not seeing it yet.
Oh, I'm trying to get it up here. Is it there yet?
It is there.
Okay. So let's see. This was the site when we first arrived. The straw was taller than us trudging through the site. And again, a western view that you could not ignore. And this is the house in its position, sort of right at the ridge right here, and the descent down into the valley. But this house is actually pinwheel shaped, which is the antithesis of compact floor planning for high performance homes, but every single room in this house has 2 or 3 exposures and really embraces the 360-degree views. So, but these homeowners actually were very committed to high performance systems. We did sneak in triple pane windows, rain screen, external insulation, but they were also committed to a full geothermal system. We went 300 feet shallow, trenched 8 feet deep out into the prairie and back. Here's their bedroom, taking advantage of all the views. Here's a view of that. We actually use a GPS insulation on the exterior because it has it's a little bit more stable at cold temperatures and has a higher R value. It also has a better perm rating than XPS or EPS. So that's why the insulation looks black there. And again, the fully adhered Henry weather barrier. And again, here you can see my signature trellis detail. I didn't realize I had a signature design element until I looked back at all these projects. There's the house, and there is the 10 kilowatt solar panel that is that along with the geothermal, they are aiming for net zero. And we did score again 1 air exchange at 50 Pascal, which was pretty impressive. There they are trenching in for the geothermal system. We have our own blower door test associated house rights, so we're testing constantly during construction. Haven't done the final just yet. And then just a really cool fact, the entire site used to be a seabed, and everywhere you walked around during construction, you picked up a rock, it was just full of sea fossils. So I thought that was a cool thing to share.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, a wonderful project that looked to be
Yeah, that was great. And there were actually a bunch of questions that came up that I think we can transition into questions that that all of you can answer afterwards. So I think, James, if you want to share your slides, and then we can, a bunch of questions have come up from all the images you guys have shared. So we'll jump on that afterwards.
So if you can allow a share screen.
Kylie, I think you have to
Yeah,
either make
I'm
him a
working
host
on
or
it.
share this. Oh, okay.
I just did it. It's just taking a second for some reason.
You should be good now.
Good, thank you. Okay, so you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so River Architects were in Cold Spring, New York. And now that's not working. Okay, there we go. So I caught some heat for not touting a local Hudson Valley brewery, and I have to stand corrected. My stout is actually from Captain Lawrence Brewery in Peekskill, New York, which is nearby. But I actually have 3 breweries under my belt and a passive house cidery. So this is the Industrial Arts Brewery, which is really a comet coming through the brewing scene. And the head brewer of the Captain Lawrence Brewery went out on his own and did this, and so we were hired to do that. It's not high performance, but it's cool. So our first high performance project was this house, which is in just up in the hills here nearby, and we had really good southern orientation, like looking out towards mounds of blueberries, and we calibrated our overhang so that summer sun is cut off, and we've got GPS foam SIP panel construction and triple pane windows. We used an American brand Hurd windows for that, and we had a pretty crappy air tightness score, which impressed our rater then. We had a 3, and it's so embarrassing to say that now, but I can admit these things. But we had a really good rain screen design with a cement board siding and hat channels, and the gull wing roof actually is vented itself, and it all kind of gathers together and then has a rain chain, which is a feature that you actually see as you come up the stairs, which is pretty cool. Then we went into our passive house work, and this is my 10th year of being a passive house architect, and I'm pretty excited about that. And it's been just like, we have just, picked up the scissors and started running with them. That's what we do. 95% of our work is passive house, and that other 5% is work that doesn't need to be passive house, garages and things like that. But this is our first certified passive house, which is net zero, and it is actually a retrofit. We had a really ugly building that was flooded by Hurricane Sandy, and we actually used EPS foam insulation and poured concrete and raised the basement floor height, which is then just a garage with a flooded out oil guzzling boiler, and ripped that out and threw it away, and then raised our finished floor height by adding our insulation, and actually lifted this building 4 inches to get foam glass in across the top of the block insulation, and then added the top floor. And we also did all the sun shading analyses. That we too have a western bias here, but we're on the eastern bank of the Hudson River, looking across to one of the most iconic mountains in the Hudson Valley, Storm King Mountain, which is really kind of one of the it was a big subject of the Hudson River School of Painters, and so really beautiful views out to the west there. You have to take my word for it because I don't have a picture of it in here. But we have actually only one window facing south because there was no sun availability from neighboring buildings and stuff like that. And one of the big challenges always in retrofits and also kind of tight urban sites is that you can't pick your orientation all the time. And we're rotated about 38 degrees off of true south, so that gets really, really challenging. We have a pergola with some vertical elements there too, which helps manage our western sun as well on some north-facing windows there that actually get blasted in the summertime. And we really love to do modern work, but because we're in a historic community, we end up having to do historically appropriate work as well. So we replaced a Victorian house that burnt down, actually. And this house was interestingly constructed out of 6 modules of conventional modular construction that we had set in place, and then did a deep energy retrofit on this. So in a lot of ways, we created our own problems and fixed them. That too is net zero. And so this house is on the top of a mountain looking south to the river. It has some pretty great views. This is a first of a series of houses for this client, and really happy with this. Here's an interior shot of it. You can just barely see a little bit of the view to the Hudson, but the great thing about these these windows and solutions is that you can really do so much with them without having to wrestle with mechanical systems, because it's all so simple. Like right there in the middle of the ceiling, you see the ERV supply, and otherwise that's kind of it for mechanicals in this space. It's super low impact. And then we've been kind of ghosting this firm in Scotland. I'll give a shout out to Rural Design Architects there in Skye that do really beautiful work. And in some ways, this is an homage to them. This is a passive house we've just completed in the Catskills that it's fairly large. And we did this as a prefabricated kind of flat pack system working with Benson wood. And so we had completely dried in 6 days with this, and have some really great results from that as well. And our work is growing into more commercial work. We just completed this passive house cidery. So it's a 10,000 square foot cidery with production at the basement level and an event space at the top. And so here, we have zero roof overhangs and some pretty daring details in terms of weather, weather tightness perhaps. But again, the Hudson, well, I didn't say this before, the Hudson Valley is a high wind area. So, an overhang can actually just be a liability in that environment, where we've had tornadoes come through and rip 150-year-old buildings apart nearby. And so the least exposure that you have to that is, the better. And then wind can blow rain sideways. So, and so the interior is that, get a sense of the view, that's out towards the Delaware River gap there. And I would say one of the challenges in design versus, it's really not versus building science, but versus value engineering, is that we actually had a solar shade design for the exterior of this, and the value engineering process actually eliminated that. So lo and behold, in the first week of February, we have the clients complaining that it's 85 degrees in there with the heat turned off. So I think it's time to revisit that solar shade. And then bringing it close to home, this is the space that I'm in right now, our studio, which you can see the building kind of mid-lift right there. It's this really sad little former horseshoeing blacksmith shop built about 1840 that was kind of rotting into the ground. And we bought it next to a gas station, which is an ongoing saga. But so we lifted the building, actually slid it back and parked it in our backyard, and then redid the foundations, reclaiming the stone from the original foundations, but actually built it out further so that it aligned with the face of the over insulation that we had used. So you can see on the right-hand side, we have the timbers exposed and actually have the sheathing layer that was pre-primed so that it kind of brightened the space. And then did a super tight air film air barrier that actually Ben and I had messed with on another project and had some great results. and then overlaid eye joists to create Larson trusses, and built out the window boxes as you see there. And the air tightness on this, again, it's a retrofit. It's a timber frame retrofit that we moved off the building, the property, right, with iron beams as needles, right, and to slide it around in roller skates, essentially to move it back and forth, and setting it back down and pulling these needles out again. We got an air tightness of, it was like 0.025 per square foot. It was this insanely tight air tightness. It's about 0.02 air changes per hour for this, about the size of half of a credit card. And just that's our entire mechanical plant there on the left hand side there. We've got a Zender ERV with actually a ground loop under our slab in the basement there, under the insulation that's underneath that concrete. We've got 300 feet of well pipe that preconditions our Zender, and essentially the incoming airstream passes across basically like a car radiator grill to pre-cool the summer air and drop the humidity out, or pre-warm it in the wintertime with that constant 55-degree air, and then distribute that in their space. And we were able to actually lower our energy demand, demonstrated by our Woofy passive model, and the tiny little Fujitsu heat mini pump, mini split heat pump there up in the top. And we're source net zero passive house certified with our building, and it's a great place to be. And that's the end of my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you guys all for sharing. As another architect, I love seeing other architects work, and how awesome it is to hear you guys talk about how you work through the details. And there was a bunch of things that kind of came up during all the different ones. And so I'll kind of take both James and Bob back to the beginning. So Bob's had the nice overhang, and then there were a couple of questions that came up when you were sharing some of your passive houses there, James, that there's no overhangs, and you talked a little bit about it from the tornado perspective and everything, but can you guys all kind of weigh in on the no overhang debate and how that aesthetic, which is a very clear aesthetic, has a relationship to the building science, right? And what details have you put together to make that as successful as it can be, right? Does the water run down the siding, rain screens, whatever? So do you guys want to talk a little bit about that detail?
Well, since I'm kind of the one who instigated that, I would say we're you can see just in my last with my building, of course, having the overhang. If you mind, I'm gonna just put that back up again. So you can see that we had cut off the original overhangs and exactly recreated them with actually the same wood species locally milled, hemlock, which is what everything is built of in the building, and it was the dominant tree species in the Hudson Valley. And so we recreated these exactly to recreate the original thing, but we had cut them all off so that you can do that super insulation that was part of what we were doing. So like it was originally down here, and then when we rebuilt it all, we had to project it back out here. And in doing so, we created those overhangs, but it's a constant, battle with paper wasps and stuff up there. It's kind of a drag to have the overhangs in that regard. But, like our approach is to treat our roof just the same as our walls. So as our roof is a rain screen and our walls are a rain screen. So in a lot of ways, it just doesn't matter that much. It's the same shtick that we're playing here at the Seminary Hill Cidery. This has a SIPS roof structure and walls, overlaid over a timber frame structure, but it's the same kind of, joke that we're pulling there. And this actually is an entrance portico with, we've got, this wood is actually reclaimed larch, which has a very high degree of rot resistance, and it's actually reclaimed from the replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's old growth New York State native larch, and underneath that we actually have polycarbonate, so that when you're inside, you actually see the light coming through those gaps. Which, look, if anyone who's been in an old barn, can really appreciate that. It's a really beautiful thing to experience, but all of those details just sort of wrap around, so there's continuity to it. It keeps it really safe. I don't know that I really answered it, but I talked a lot.
I mean, I applaud you for doing this so many times and so successfully. I don't know that I'd have the guts in my climate zone to even ask my builder friends to do that. I think we've all, in the conversations I have with people I build with, we're always talking about, the deeper the overhang, the better, not just for protecting the foundation from, surface water, the siding. We do get a ton of blowing rain. That's true. But then, as I showed in my projects, I am constantly relying on overhangs for solar protection from the intense summer sun, because in Wisconsin, you don't really need air conditioning for cooling. You do need airflow and dehumidification. So if you can keep a lot of that direct sun out in the summer. And I saw somebody ask the question, what dates do I use to calculate my angles? I'm using, anywhere from the end of July to the middle of September to really target when I want to keep the sun out of the inside.
Yeah, what I find really helpful is just building a model and running it through a solar simulation and just let it go. And you can actually just let the computer do it, just pick your latitude and go.
Yeah, I mean, I have run into actually, it's more, again, it's aesthetics versus performance versus budget is value engineering, right? Because it costs a lot of money sometimes to engineer a deep overhang if you're not going in the direction of the trusses or the joists. And so sometimes it's a challenge. And like I said, when I'm fixed in on a specific orientation for the site, I try my hardest to make the orientation of the home and the structure of the home work with the view and the site and the solar. But more often than not, as I said, if it's not the client's motivation, you just have to work with what you're given. And it's been an interesting challenge. I would say a lot of the work I do, I aim for beauty in the eye of my client and performance goals that I can sleep with at night.
I'll chime in here. I'll chime in. I'm doing a project right now that has that Mary Tepper Western aspect to it, and it's a pretty tight budget. So the ideal solution would be to do some sort of exterior screen that would really protect from those high Western winds and that blowing rain and snow and the intense sun, but it's not in the budget. So our second best is to do some pretty nice interior solar screens. But yeah, we get, and to answer, Lloyd Alter just added in the chat, he was asking about what about coastal New England, and you do look at traditional coastal New England architecture and see very often that particularly the smaller houses have no eaves, and the intent there is that yes, it's going to get wet, how fast can it dry out? So eaves will slow the drying a little bit. So there's a good building science aspect from over 100 years ago there, and we have to look at that in every building we do. Every site is so different, and sometimes there is huge overhangs for whether it's weather or sun, and sometimes we just try to pull back and make sure if materials get wet, they dry out.
Which brought up another question. I think that was part of the chat. Does somebody want to weigh in on that specific thing?
Yeah, I was just going to chime in right there on the overhang situation. To me, if we're building these buildings that are so super insulated and so airtight, we have to be really cognizant of our water management to begin with in the first place. So if we're doing those details well, whether or not we have overhangs really shouldn't affect the performance of the wall that much. The wall should be able to drain and dry freely, whether or not there's overhangs. We get into solar shading, or just the aesthetics, that becomes a different argument. But I don't think we need to be relying on overhangs to keep our buildings dry anymore. I think they're purely aesthetic. And not to cut you off, Emily, but I think all three of you admittedly, arguably, have kind of a contemporary flair to your styles. And I think historically, a lot of high performance that we've seen has kind of a contemporary flair. Do you think that's a reflexive action of the performance of the building, or do you think that's just a cultural style? Is there a relationship there? We don't often see any traditional old school style detailed buildings. Bob, you have some elements in your work, but they seem to be at opposite ends of the spectrum for the most part. Is that related?
I would say for me, absolutely not. I'm not sort of your stereotypical architect. I never tell clients what they need or imagine what their building should be. I go through a very rigorous interview process, trying to really get at the root motivation of what's going to make my homeowners happy. And so all of my work is actually a real reflection of what they're looking to achieve. Whether it's the open concept, which some people noted is kind of going out of fashion, and I would have to agree with that. Although these folks all wanted open concept homes. So, it's if I was designing my own house, sure, I would have a lot of different answers. And even working in the Midwest, I mean, the amount of craftsman and Tudor style homes I design is equal to the modern architecture I'm working on.
It's funny because I would say that our more modern projects have more overhangs. I mean, like the project in the mountain has deep overhangs. That retrofit on the Hudson has very big overhangs. Not that it does any good for weather management. I mean, like when the wind comes down the Hudson Valley, I worry more about those overhangs and the roof ripping off. Watching the chat a little bit, and people take issues with roof overhangs and wind. It's like the design load for the wind here is 110 miles an hour. So, you better plan for wind, the aesthetic for our cidery project, while it is, has definitely a crisp modern feel to it, the concept is that we're working with a barn, that we're building a modern barn, a bank barn, so that we take advantage of the grade so that the tractors roll in at the lower level, which, that's where the apples go in and become cider. And the upper level is where, the Brooklynites pull in and park their Teslas and come in for some beverage,
So I can't help but notice the emphasis on overhangs, which I would have predicted. But are there other areas of the building that we can give as much weight to in terms of this battle?
Solar control, yeah.
What are some of the?
You said.
Go ahead, Emily.
I was going to say, James said solar control. So there were also a bunch of questions that came up on windows and window to wall ratio and solar control and orientation. So I think that's another big aspect of high performance buildings. And also too, what maybe leads itself to feel a little bit more modern, right? Like those huge windows sometimes make something that's not necessarily contemporary in nature feel a lot more contemporary. So I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit about windows and performance and solar shading and overheating or that.
Yeah. My interesting thing is, some students asked me the other day, how can I design sort of a cost-effective high performance home? And besides saying, well, just make a cube, decorate a cube, I did give them a few tips, namely some that I've actually learned from working with Zola window manufacturers in the past, which is to say that, the largest fixed triple pane UPVC window can cost the same as like a Marvin double hung. so you can get these really impressive aesthetic moves with huge walls of glass. And if they're oriented and shaded properly, not have too much deduction on your, your energy performance. So.
And they work better too.
Right. Yeah. Well, fixed windows always, yeah.
But like the thickness of the glass, like the air spaces, the clearness of the glass. It's something I kind of made a little comment at the beginning, that green gull roof window that we use, the American Herd made windows, they leak like crazy. The glass is really, really green, and 3 layers of green glass is just like, that's the greenhouse, so we love that project, but hate the windows, so yeah.
I can actually do a screen share, go back to my project and try to tie the roof and the window discussion together. So why don't I?
You're killing all of the birds with one stone, Bob. There was people asking to see more pictures from your specific projects. Yeah. Your timing is impeccable.
Okay, are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the lower roof here, which has very deep overhangs, is protecting some very valuable window real estate. And where windows are much more exposed, you can see, the siding is a lot cheaper and easier to fix and replace. And it doesn't have so much an overhang. The windows themselves, they're expensive. I mean, these are Zola UPVC. Mary help, UPVC.
PVC.
I can never do that. Oh, I have a list of words that I just need to point to somebody and have them say. But and you can see what we're doing, really protecting. And just to back up to this photo, this house is essentially a cube. There are 4 walls and a roof, and the roof is only one plane, and there's absolutely no penetrations in it. We even got the plumbing vent high on the right-hand side wall. The big issue with roofs for me is, where does the water go? I want the snow to stay up there if at all possible. Where does that water go? So we have this, it's like a 4-inch, you can't really see it there, but it's a piece of angle. It's dropped from the roof. It can catch a hell of a lot of water. It sends it 3 feet out past the house with a rain chain. So those are the issues for me, so much more than protecting the siding from some rain. I really want to protect those windows from the rain. And having a high performance home with a big, fat, thick wall, you can really get that window nicely protected in a way that you could never do with say a code minimum house. And so, here's some more siding details. The big overhangs are there, but they're protecting the most valuable resources. The entrances, doors are super expensive, and they go right down to the floor. So that's an extra liability. And with the siding that I'm using up here, if anything goes bad with that siding, if there's like a bad splash area, or this can easily be just replaced. You can replace a single board at a time. So we designed that durability, but also replaceability into a project. We use a lot of local woods too. That's another shot. You can really see how well that big, expensive window is protected. So we didn't need the roof to do that protection. So I will stop share, go back.
I love those oversized battens. That's such a cool detail.
So I guess, do performance and traditional design, are they mutually exclusive?
Ha.
I hope not.
The builder said certainly not.
I think you have to really look carefully at historic houses and see what is working, what is just a purely aesthetic addition that might have been all the rage in some builder's book at that particular time period. Just put it all in perspective. And there's some really good lessons. I think if the Shakers were building houses nowadays, if there were Shakers nowadays, they would be building passive houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the I look a lot to vernacular architecture, especially, in Wisconsin, trying to figure out, and the farmhouse here being a really common form. And the wraparound porch, is just a classic example of what we're talking about. And so Bob's design is the modern interpretation of the wraparound porch. Now, truly, that element's going to get value engineered out of a lot of new home construction because it's thought of as expensive, not needed space. But I think, it's one of those things that if you can tip the needle towards some of these other elements. So it's actually amazing to me, for example, that I was able to get 4 projects with 4 wooden pergolas when one would argue, what's the purpose? It doesn't even keep the rain off the deck, right? But there is something just sort of emotional about being under that pergola and the way it just makes the house look prettier, I guess, that it stayed in the budget and it's been built 4 times.
James, didn't you build a pergola into the passive house retrofit that you shared with us tonight? That I can distinctly remember a beautiful shot of what you incorporated for shading for that outdoor area.
Right, and that actually does manage rain too, because we, it's kind of the same punchline that we used for the cidery project, putting polycarbonate under the wood timbers so that we, both do control that horizontal western sunlight, but also manage rain too. So it's great outdoor space that isn't too dark. That's a big aspect of it.
Yeah, it was interesting for me when I was thinking about today too, and the value engineering of these elements that we all love and enjoy. How do you start from the basics of creating a form and a geometry where you can't value engineer out in a major element like that is so important aesthetically?
Right, you lock it in there so that it can't be yanked out again. Yeah. One of the fun things that I'm really happy was retained in the cidery project is that little peek out window on the side. And the original reason for that was that the owner of the project was going to put his own personal house to the west side of there. And he didn't want to have anybody having a clear view towards his house. So I sculpted the view so that, look that way and don't look that way. And it really, I was just so glad that didn't get VE'd out. And it's decisions like that are kind of baked in early, and you actually forget what the reason why you did some of these things, but they're actually really good decisions that brings light into the middle of a really large space that otherwise would be kind of too much like a corridor or something. So it's like, making design decisions are really important to defend them,
That's why that Eve return will never go away.
Exactly.
That's in a similar vein, do you guys have any tricks that you can use? Like, I know it's difficult, or in the past it was difficult to use high performance triple glazed European windows in historic work because of the sight lines of them. They didn't match the traditional double hungs, but now we have suppliers that can give us simulated divided light type things with those style windows. Is there anything else in those veins that you guys have come up with? Maybe that's the one. I don't know.
Yeah, my building, you see it right behind me, is simulated double hung. The thing that's cool in here, it hasn't happened yet, but I've got exterior shading that's motorized, and that'll all come down soon, because it's actually one of the things that the folks at Macrowind have done their math on, is that I think they're saying it's about 10% boost on the heat retention overnight when you have exterior solar shading down overnight, because you're not doing that kind of black body heat transfer. So while it helps prevent overheating in the daytime, it also helps prevent heat loss overnight.
Does that also prevent the external condensation phenomenon with triple pane?
No, well, so that, like, we don't really have much of an issue with condensation, just because like the thermal, like the R values are just so robust here. But like what'll happen is sometimes, and I think what you're getting at is, like, overnight it might be really cold, and then in the morning, like maybe a warm front comes through, it's warm and humid, and then that cold glass, sort of like, going to the beer counter, the beer, aisle in the supermarket, and you open the door and that warm, moist air hits that glass and everything fogs up again, so like that sort of thing is really hard to avoid, and this doesn't really do it because it's fairly porous.
Right. Yeah, I would say that way actually on the last project I showed you, the pinwheel shaped prairie ridge house. That came as a surprise to our clients when they couldn't enjoy all their views one morning because of all the exterior condensation. And I said, shoot, for all I educated you on the benefits of triple pane glass, I forgot to tell you that one thing.
Yeah. For the lack of a squeegee, right?
So it'll burn off in an hour. Be patient.
Right.
Yeah.
Travis wants to kill the overhang conversation in the chat box, but he did bring up something that somebody else said, which is about the dark colors and painting things black and exterior siding materials. So let's talk a little bit about siding materials. A lot of you guys are using natural woods. Everybody wants no maintenance. That's not a thing. Let's just get rid of that term. It's not a thing, guys.
Yeah.
But painting dark colors and what does the overhangs and the shadow lines do for patterns on that, maintaining the colors, wood siding, longevity, rain screens, like those are all other additional aesthetic plus performance details. Who wants to jump on that bandwagon?
I just want to say black houses are gorgeous. Oh man.
Can't help yourself.
They're just so sexy. Just forget all the building science. Black houses. I have a whole entire Pinterest board of black houses.
And my wife and I are buying a house and painting it black this year.
Are you?
Maybe it's the Midwest, but I've got friends who complain to me about every black house that's popping up in town. I mean, architects love them.
I was going to say the black houses of, today, what mauve was from the 80s, like your house will be dated in 20 years, guaranteed.
So, but it's interesting because I'm designing another house right now, and the homeowners want it black, and they said our aesthetic is supposed to be sort of modern camp, campground.
Yep.
And so I was, again, inspired by vernacular architecture. I stumbled upon Icelandic architecture, which has a lot of black houses and roofs, but they use white window frames, which I think is pretty interesting and opens you up to a majority of more window products. For example, white UPVC.
I'm gonna have to log off. I got to go buy stock in Honda power washers. You can't keep a black house clean like you can't keep a black car clean. It's definitely going to be the cobweb side business guy that goes around with the Webster. That guy's making money hand over fist with all the architects going black. I agree, they're beautiful, but I would never want to care for one. And I'm excited to hear the tales of Ben Bogey's new home and the amount of time increased in maintenance and cleaning because of the beautiful. I'm sure it will be beautiful and well detailed, but I do think that there is something to be said about that. And I realize everything requires maintenance. There is no, as Emily said, there is no.
You're assuming I'm actually going to get the time to actually paint the house, so that's the first hurdle.
The cobbler's children have no shoes. I'm with you.
Just paint the street facade.
And dirty black and covered in cobwebs and faded at least turns into kind of another nice and interesting color as opposed to red, which turns to pink or orange.
Right.
So that was a thing for a while, and nobody painted those either.
Yeah,
it's the Morticia Adams aesthetic.
So here's a little confessional. Driving around with my daughter, years ago when she was about 4 years old and just starting to read, driving along and she goes, "Look, Teddy, there's a Tyvek house too." Like, that's our house.
Tyvek house.
Then you'll be lucky if you have siding,
The one black house I did was standing seam metal, so that's pretty durable. You don't have to clean that so much. You just, on that west side, you don't go up and lean against the house on a bright, sunny summer day because you'll die.
Yeah, I'm with Travis. Pollen is tenacious here. We have our tree pollen season, and it's no one's friend.
Yeah. So and Robert, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, actually, like the other half of the cidery project is it's all standing seam. So the roof and the walls are, like dove gray standing seam, and the zinc overhang of that first passive house that we did, where it comes down from the roof. That's all, true zinc, and which is great for durability because if you scratch it, it'll heal.
Yeah. So if your metal roof is protecting the metal siding, I mean, focus on the windows. Forget the siding.
Yeah. I mean, I'm using a lot of Hardy siding here, and they have the 25-year warranty on their Color Plus technology, and folks seem really happy with that. Builders seem to really like it. You just sort of soft pressure wash it once a year.
Cool.
So you brought up Hardy, and we saw wood, and somebody said something about black tar. Bob, isn't part of your overhang detail painted with some kind of tar or something? Maybe that wasn't you. I can't remember.
Oh, on the Sugar Bush house, I showed a slide. There's black lattice work, and that is a black stain. And we went for that because it was just too cool not to. The rest of the house is completely untreated hemlock from a local mill. I mean, it's actually the entire house is clad with wood from within 5 miles of the site. So that's something I like to push, and it's a bit experimental and probably get me in big trouble someday, but it's a lot of fun. And the builders enjoy working with real wood and not having to, work with more composite materials and having to paint stuff. So it becomes a real showcase for our local wood species and our local craftsmen and even the sawyer who we work with. So that's a lot of fun.
I think you mentioned too.
Sorry, Emily. A coworker of mine right now is sorry.
Sorry, I have a delay on my end. Go, Ben.
A coworker of mine is currently just finishing his house, and he used a black pine pitch and linseed oil or tung oil mix, I think, to dress up marine plywood for kind of a flat paneled section of the house. And it kind of took a pretty cheap material and dressed it up because it's got some texture to it and some depth and so on and so forth, and supposedly should age pretty well and be maintainable.
What about woodpeckers? It's a big problem where I live.
Well, if you have, here's the thing. If you have woodpeckers and you have wood siding, they're going after the bugs that are in the siding, so you got a bigger problem than woodpeckers.
No, they're just going after the hollow sound.
If you have a metal building, they'll whack on that because that makes a really big sound and attracts just the right quality of mate. Serious.
I want to push on the natural wood aspect and the local wood aspect. So we've been using some eastern white cedar as well as black locust, and great stuff, man. And it's hard to find it, but it's really worth it. Any thoughts on that?
I get a lot of inquiry. I use a lot of black locust myself. Also eastern white cedar and local hemlock. I get a lot of inquiries about the black locust. And working with my local sawyer here in southern Vermont, black locust grow huge. Yeah. And so you can really saw a log and get a really good cut that's going to be stable and last a long time. It's the skinnier little trees that you really should be using for fencing that you want to avoid, but it's all about the cutting. And so I do field a lot of calls like, where can I get this? And I just refer it to my sawyer because I figure he has better connections for other people than I do.
I think one of the other things when you're talking about performance and aesthetics and building science, and I think they did this on the Sugar Bush house, Bob, was that when you have offcuts for the siding and stuff that you're doing, you can just give that to all the locals who all have wood stoves who are all heating their houses with that, versus like you offcut a bunch of vinyl siding and that's going to the dump, right? It's not going anywhere else and it's staying there for however like million years. So
whenever I do a job visit, I mean, yesterday I came back from another project that we're doing. It's all sheathed in boards because my builders like to sheathe in boards. So I came back with the back of my car filled with big barrels full of offcuts to distribute amongst all my neighbors because they just can't get rid of them fast
I
enough.
love Vermont.
So another sort of historic siding that we're using a lot of today actually is cementous hardcoat stucco. There was a lot of pushback against EIFS, for a long time. And so people are wary, but once we say, no, we're doing it the traditional way with the 2 WRBs, and sometimes I can even sneak in some, a drainage plane mat behind it as well, which I advocate for. It turns out to be one of the most cost competitive siding materials in our region. And you can really start to go after that historic look. I said I do a lot of Tudor style work, but bringing it to modern architecture is working as well.
So Travis is teeing me up here real quick to talk about vinyl siding, because I famously almost got chased out of a passive house convention for mentioning that there was a study done a while ago, and we can debate its validity about the life cycle carbon of painting wood siding versus installing vinyl siding. And what they found is that it's actually more sustainable to use vinyl siding, even if you don't recycle it, than what it's going to take to scrape and paint multiple times over the lifetime of a wood-sided building. And whether or not the details of that are absolutely factual, it bars bearing in mind. The other part of that equation is if we do get a real recycling facility for vinyl siding happening here in the US at some point, then vinyl starts to become even more attractive. I know it's kind of the taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about using vinyl on a high performance or a eco-friendly building, but it might actually be the sustainable choice.
Yeah.
Well, in our black building here, because it's black, it actually bakes out all the pitch and stuff like that. And we've had to restain a bunch of times. But with restaining, we don't have to scrape it all the way down, and that's way better than paint.
On that subject, not to get lost on a tangent here, but black siding, if you do black siding over a ventilated rain screen, you've kind of set your siding up for like the utmost performance over its lifetime, because you're going to solar heat it and it's going to dry the snot out of it. So your chance of failure is like even reduced even further. So if you can bear the aesthetics, the performance should be great.
There's some passive heating HVAC design where they use black siding to actually preheat incoming air, and that I haven't really explored too much, but it was something we considered for one of our brewery projects. And it's a furnace, it's a furnace readily available,
I've seen similar techniques where they do that to preheat the air and direct it to the mini split heat pumps. So during cold climate seasons, it's actually kind of preheating the air and it's boosting the COP of performance on the heat pumps.
That's great. Can I show one more? We've got a tiny studio, 90 square feet, right here in my village that we've done, and it's got a lot of stuff to it that is cool. We've got locally harvested stone that's from a quarry that's been closed for 100 years. And then black locust heavy timbers, these were actually from my backyard here at my studio. And then locust actually for our solar shade control to prevent the overheating of this very large triple pane window here. And then it's got Western red cedar siding. We wanted to do Eastern, but just kind of lost control of things. And we've got this really cool thing right here, which is a compact heat pump actually imported from Italy, but now readily available in the US. Epica is the company, and then a tiny little through-wall ERV. And this doesn't need heat. I mean, that is just there for peace of mind, I think. Oh, and it's also on helical piles too, so it's like really super light.
One of the things that and again, not to, it's interesting talking about like these passive measures, and being a passive house certified designer, I'm all about the idea of investing in the envelope first and the active system second, or like you don't have to use any system if you've done it right. But more and more PV solar panels seem to be a way that homeowners are able to really make an impact today. And the costs have come down dramatically. We're seeing it more and more on almost every project we're doing here in Madison. And I'm curious how the BIPV was all the rage 10, 15 years ago. I don't know that it's really come that far in terms of its aesthetic development, but just in terms of rooftop solar, I had another project I didn't even share, and I could put that picture up. But again, these people put enough solar panels on their roof to negate their energy consumption, their electric consumption over the course of a year, which is very admirable, but it's not beautiful.
And not every site has good solar access.
Yeah. And so I think it's our job to really start to maybe focus a little bit more too on how we're going to integrate the modules of the solar panels. I even noticed on one of your projects, like your solar array, it had like the missing tooth. And I know that like you can't get a perfect rectangle of solar panels if the number of panels don't make sense to the system. And, as an architect, it just drives me crazy if you're like missing one panel.
Or you just didn't take that.
It's like, why can't we just put it there for aesthetics? It's not contributing.
You have the wrong solar installer. I swear, my solar installer is from Vermont. He is like the best dude. And we stood on a job site on Wednesday and discussed the aesthetic appeal of the solar system that we were putting on the roof so that it not only performed but also looked good and didn't trap the snow, right? Because that could be a problem if you have it up too high or too low and it gets caught on the bottom. You have shingles and then the snow backs up. And I personally think, and this is a weird aesthetic, probably not architecture thing, but if I walk up and you have solar panels on your roof, I'm like, that's the sexiest building in this whole development. It's the best one, right? But that is a pushback, and not all of them have good solar exposure. Community solar is great if you have, or ground mounted systems if you can't. There are other ways to kind of get to your solar performance, but I think hopefully it's something that we're training people to just get used to seeing them so that they start to blend in. But you're right. The missing tooth is like mind boggling to me. Like, why? What part of this just, of all the money you put in the whole house, one more solar panel is not going to break the bank.
Well, apparently it just doesn't work with the system. It's a fixed number of panels. That's it.
You got to have somebody on site to stay on top of where the plumbers send the vent out, because otherwise they're going to stick it out right in the middle of where your array is going.
Very true.
And truly,
I try to get that vent going out the wall, not the roof.
Right. But as we get more into this, I suspect that the future of the, utility grid is going to be that we're going to be demanding more of our utilities switch over to solar. And we're going to be putting more burden on, I'm already part of community share here in Madison. A lot of houses are, because we don't have exposure on our own homes. Mm-hmm. But as the utility companies more and more invest in these solar fields, I almost wonder how that's going to influence this conversation that we're having today, 10 years from now, in terms of a lot of these aesthetic moves we're making to hit certain performance goals, when if our energy is coming from a lot more solar, how are we going to, change our attitude? I mean, is it going to be like the cheap oil of the 70s again? And we're going to say, it doesn't even matter if we have high performance windows because
Allison Bales had an article a couple of years ago where he kind of penciled out the math that if we hit $1.50 an installed watt, then that actually becomes more cost effective than adding insulation to our structures. And at that point, we just start adding more panels.
Yeah.
So that day may very well come.
I live in a 1970 Cape with 2x4 walls insulated with mouse dew. It's pretty piss poor, but I've got this 11,000 kilowatt array that's gorgeous. And, so I'm essentially net zero.
I think at the same time,
sorry.
I was going to say there's going to be a balance too, right? Because sometimes the things that we do for performance are for comfort and not always for
I'm not comfortable
energy savings, right? It's not always about the money, when we're talking building science too, right? So you're still going to be putting in those triple pane fixed windows because it's really comfortable to sit next to that. Like, even if energy is cheap, you'd have to have bigger mechanical systems to kind of make up for the energy. So
yeah, and it goes back to where I started, where I say I'm constantly thickening walls and creating false shafts in all of my designs to accommodate the big ducts that need to move all the air, and that's not the goal.
And we don't duct air so much around here, but those thick walls and those thick spaces, that's a design opportunity.
So we are unfortunately at the point in the night where I have to ask you guys all to weigh in on like what's your takeaway for the night, what's the thing, what's the detail, what's your final saying. I mean, I loved Mary took us to solar there at the end, so that was awesome. But we can go around. Ladies first. How about?
Who's going first? Wait, Kylie, are you going?
No, you're the guest, so it's up to you.
I mean, I read a really interesting article in preparation for tonight, and where were my notes on this? And hold on. It just talked about like where we start, what's good design, what's elevated design, and then what's exceptional design. And I think as architects, we're constantly, balanced on this line between don't let perfect be the enemy of good all the time. And so, all of us here care so much about performance goals. And like I said, there are things that I need to be able to sleep at night, knowing that's happening on my projects. But it's really just, to me, it's all about educating the clients. And I have this goal, to make some community lectures, and pre-COVID times, I would have gone to all the public libraries and hosted essentially something like this for the community. And I think, I don't know, people in the Midwest don't have as much exposure as, what's happening on the East Coast. And, people like Ben and Travis, we're all trying to raise awareness in our local communities. And I think that's just starting from code minimum, but a good design, and then what's possible.
Yeah.
Bob, did you hear that? I think that Mary is joining Dylan on the Pretty Good House Homeowner.
We are so going to recruit her after this. Oh, she's in big trouble. She didn't know what she signed up for tonight.
Also, might drink the Kool-Aid.
So, all right, Bob, your final thoughts?
Well, a couple of things. Let's get rid of that versus between aesthetics and performance, but also black houses. So Ben gave me another reason to push black houses, and I love it. Thank you. I also want to note that my solar panels are all black. They don't even have the little silver edge. They are sexy.
Yeah, good combination. Yeah, can see that. It's very masculine.
And that's why Bob's the smoothie architect. All right, James.
So I would say that I want to push back about the reliance on solar rather than insulation, because when you have a foot of snow on your roof, what's your solar doing? Especially if the power lines are coming down because it was a blizzard that came through. And where are you going to next? Because you're going to be shit out of luck, right? And so my building here, that's a passive house, we had a little bit of ice kind of dribble off the roof and get into the heat pump outdoor unit, and it took us 3 days to figure out that thing was shut down on a fault, because and it was 0 degrees outside, and it got down to 65 degrees in here. It was terrible, and so like passive survivability is a really important issue. And so make your buildings better so that you don't have to worry about what happens when shit hits the fan. That's the stout talking.
It's not though. It's the truth.
It's the truth. All right.
It's talking. It's the stout talking to the truth.
That's what happens when you have beer until building science.
NBS, yeah.
In that same vein, my pushback, James, for that is that it's good conservation and good stewardship for us to insulate our buildings versus relying on something for energy production.
For sure.
And carbon neutral insulation, right? Dense packed cellulose, like just store those carbon molecules in that wall for 100 years,
Being that it's my first night here, I'm going to take the liberties for a closing thought. I don't think, like Bob said, that these have to be mutually exclusive. Personally, I'm waiting for the client with the sensibilities and the budgets that wants me to do a full Victorian painted lady to passive house levels. I just haven't found one yet. So if anybody knows one.
I had one, yep.
Bob, I think your point is well taken. And when I write about this, I will certainly be renaming the title of the show Performance and Aesthetics, or Aesthetics and Performance. No more verses. Point taken.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I had a great time.
I'm going to just throw one pitch out there. The FIAS conference is coming to the Hudson Valley this October or something like that. And we're all going to, I got my shot today. We're all going to have shots.
Yes.
And you are all going to drink cider from the cidery.
Yes. I'm coming.
We're have this together. And
I will be there.
In chat too. You're all
Sounds wonderful.
I'm buying.
That sounds like such
And I'm bringing
fun.
my pipes.
Yay. Can I bring my tap shoes?
Yes.
It sounds like fun.
It's a date. We'll see you there.
Thank you for the
Sounds
invite,
good.
James.
Good
Excited for
Thank
that.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Thank you
night,
for
all.
sharing everything.